if you think we're going to be living in this multi-chain world, doesn't even matter at the end of the day what chain you're on if we're just going to keep jumping to the next one that has speed or scalability improvements. I mean, I guess I'm not quite understanding how to wrap my head around how to think through that environment when does your data just live on the chain of the moment? Then we're going to be jumping to the next thing.
So I think the reason why interoperability matters. So I don't think it's true that chains basically don't matter once interoperability is solved. And that your data can basically just go anywhere, or you might as well just kind of be a migrant and move from chain to chain. You may need to do that for certain things, but I think the way that I like to think about interoperability, so I have this analogy of describing blockchains as cities. And the idea is that each of these individual blockchains are different cities. So, like, Ethereum is New York, and maybe Solana is LA, and maybe Near is San Francisco, and then Avalanche is Chicago. And if you imagine these are all different cities, and they have different characteristics, they have different specialties, they have different, in Solana the weather is really great, it's really cheap, but there's not as much culture as there might be in New York. In a world like that, the biggest thing that is missing if you don't have interoperability is basically a highway system. You don't have the ability to, let's say that you want to, go shoot your movie. It's like, okay, you'll go to LA for that, but then you might go back home after you're done. Or if you want, I don't know, these are somewhat tortured examples, but each of these different cities has something different within it that you might want to do. But that doesn't mean you need to uproot and move your entire life. Now you might decide to say that, hey, I think LA is the place where I should probably have most of my assets and be kind of long-term settled. But the reality is the infrastructure within these different chains makes it attractive to different kinds of people and different types of use cases. Now, if you don't have that highway system, if you don't have an easy way to get from San Francisco to LA, then these two ecosystems are going to be much more balkanized. It's going to be much harder for there to be quote unquote inner city commerce between SF and LA. You really want that. It does an enormous amount of good to have these protocols able to go cross-chain and able to basically not have to think about the implementation details. When you're using the internet, you use servers from different places, right? So you might go to CNN.com, and CNN.com calls some other ad service and then some other layout service and some other thing. And these all live on different servers. And you have no idea that it's happening. You don't need to care that it's happening. Why would anyone need to tell you that they're different servers? But in the very early days of the internet, if you were interacting with different servers, you could tell because it would be extremely slow. The second, HTTP call and the third HTTP call, it'd take ages. You had to do everything on one server because otherwise it was just, the latency was going to be too bad. We've moved to a world with the internet that the question of which servers is it on has been totally abstracted from you as a user. You have no idea how many servers you're calling. You don't care. You don't need to care. And eventually, this will also be true for blockchains. But it's not true today, and it's not going to be true for a while. But that's the end game. The end game is that you're on a blockchain, and you don't even need to know what blockchain is this other application on. You just call the other application.
Yeah. You mentioned the server thing, and it's funny because over this past weekend, we were sitting at a restaurant, and we were talking about the cloud with one of my friends, and she didn't quite get where your data was backed up to, and kind of explaining something similar. You don't need to know where it is. You just got to know that it's backed up in 10 different locations, so your data is always secure. And then we were at a restaurant, on the menu you could see the link, the URL was an Amazon S3 bucket, so you could see that it was S3 dot, and it was actually, the server was located in the EU, which I thought was interesting since we were in America, and I thought we would have been directed to a US one, right? But
Right.
So okay, with interoperability then, I feel like some of the different L1s, you just mentioned a bunch of them as cities. Solana in LA, ETH in New York, Avalanche in Chicago. Are they all do you feel like they're marketing themselves as these blockchains for specific use cases, or are they being marketed as ETH killers? And so I wonder, why is Solana LA? Is it doing something different? Is Solana going to be where we actually do all of our NFT trading on, because it's the fees, NFT, all the blue chip NFTs are going to start being released on Solana because of the fees and whatnot. Whereas, Avalanche might be more financial related. Are are we going to start seeing them separate out like that? Or do you think there are still going to be these general blockchains that are going to tout their transaction speed improvements and, stuff like that?
So I think the concept of ETH killers, this concept really came about in 2017, 2018. So it was very much the last cycle term for most of these alt L1s. Now we mostly call them alt L1s. And I think the reason for that is that we now realize that, look, these things are not going to kill anyone. These things are going to coexist. In the same way that, is LA the New York killer? No, they're two different cities, and they both have different. They're very differentiated from each other. They both have their own specialties, and the world is going to be big enough for both of them. It turns out they're not really competing with each other in such an obvious way. I think this is a good description of how L1s compete with each other and how they think about coexistence. So, it's certainly the case that Solana and Avalanche and all these other layer ones are fully general in that you can do anything on these blockchains, just the same way you can on Ethereum in principle. Now, how will they differentiate? What will be their specialties? We're still discovering that. It is actually a little bit weird if you think about it. So right now, Solana, the biggest thing that's working on Solana today is NFTs. A huge amount of trading activity of NFTs takes place in Solana. And I think Solana DeFi broadly is struggling, right? Solana DeFi is not really doing super hot, which is ironic because NFTs are, if you think about it, Solana is a super high performance blockchain, right? Anatoly has described Solana as the NASDAQ of blockchains. So if Solana is the NASDAQ of blockchains, it's super fast, got very quick block time, very low latency, very high throughput. But the primary thing it's being used for is trading NFTs, which does not need low latency, which does not need high throughput. Like trading NFTs is actually kind of fine on pretty much any chain. So it's a little odd that that's the thing that Solana is working for. But it is the case. That's what Solana is working for. So now eventually I do think that Solana will become more of Solana's product market fit will probably become around the things that take advantage of its scalability and its very high throughput and its very low latency. But today it's not really the case. Avalanche is certainly more of a DeFi chain. And in gaming, I think seems to be the second thing that is really working on Avalanche. But I think it's also still early, right? These cities just were founded like a year and a half ago, roughly, for most of these. And they're just now hitting their inflection points of growth. So I think we're going to discover a lot more in the coming years about what are the identities of these chains and where do they really develop their own specialization and network effects.
Yeah. What type of identity do you see being Ethereum's? I'm kind of curious because from the NFT world, I see people saying that the highest class NFTs will be minted on Ethereum. Maybe cheaper ones will go elsewhere. Like you wouldn't paint a Picasso on printer paper. You want to put it on a canvas. So like, what do you see that identity being for Ethereum moving forward? Because right now it's been a little bit of a catch-all since a lot of the development has happened there over the years, and now it's starting to disperse.
Yeah, I think in the analogy of L1s as cities, Ethereum is Manhattan. It is the most expensive, most congested, super old, full of technical debt. Everyone loves to complain about it. It's so crowded. It's like it sucks. It's so annoying. But the reality is that Manhattan is the most happening place in America. If you just pound for pound, the richest people in the world, the most connected people in the world, the most cultured people in the world, the most accomplished people in the world, they're in Manhattan. And the same thing is true of Ethereum, right? If you look at Ethereum, all the biggest DeFi protocols, just like all the biggest banks, are in Manhattan. Doesn't matter how expensive it is, you have to have your headquarters there. Same thing is true in DeFi. All the biggest DeFi protocols, they're on Ethereum. All the biggest NFT projects, it's like the biggest artists, the biggest galleries, the biggest whatever, they're all on Ethereum. Now, if you're, the rent is crazy, the congestion sucks. It's impossible to get around town. But if you are an up and comer, it might be too difficult for you to, it's like, okay, maybe 20 years ago, I could have moved to Manhattan and gotten a cheap apartment. Now it's like almost impossible to even just get like a studio for, any sane amount of prices. So I have to go somewhere else. I have to start my career in another place. And a lot of people increasingly are feeling that way about Ethereum, is that, look, Ethereum is awesome. Clearly it is the center of gravity of the crypto universe, but it's too expensive. I'm priced out. And I got to look elsewhere if I want to plant a flag and build my community.
You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the metaverse.